Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. Today we're going to be talking about a major problem in fashion. It's lack of diversity and inclusivity. I think there's two major parts to this that I want to talk about. The first one is catwalks. So a couple of years ago, the general opinion was that fashion diversity on catwalk shows was getting better. In 2020, there were some notable improvements. In particular, the first two models outside of a standard sample size walked for Fendi catwalk. And a sample size is the US like 0 to 4, which I think is UK 6 to 10, which does not sound like it should be a major thing, but it was at the time. Also, Valentino was praised in 2022 for their convention-breaking catwalk that featured models with grey hair and average-sized bodies, whatever that means. I think the media in particular was trying to push this narrative, and I was believing it, certainly. I think there was a lot of social media discourse about this, so like public perception was maybe a little bit shifted towards the idea that diversity was getting better and better, but actually it has majorly regressed in the past few years. And that kind of came to a head in the 2023 autumn-winter shows. There was a massive debate brought on by the journalist Vanessa Friedman, talking about how there was a massive lack of diversity at one of the shows she attended. She ended up having to create this thread that explained her comments, but she was pretty scathing in the idea that inclusivity in fashion has gotten worse and it's more lip service than anything else. Brands trying to talk about how they're diversive, but not actually putting their money where their mouth is. Thanks to this being public discourse in 2023, we thought that potentially designers would sit up and take notice and make changes really quickly, but that didn't happen. So in the next 6 months showing, SS24 didn't really seem to do that much better. According to Vogue, plus size representation made up less than 1% of the season's looks. And they were eager to note that typically it was smaller, younger brands that were actually putting size inclusivity or diversity on the runway, and that major brands were doing so much worse and sticking to a particular image that you'd typically associate with their kind of houses. You can see here that it's smaller fashion weeks leading the change. So Copenhagen has the best size inclusivity compared to the big four, and London has the most size inclusivity of the big four, but it's still not enough. I mean, Copenhagen was doing really well, but London diversity is still not hitting, even if they're doing the best. I think all of this is pretty well encapsulated with the rise and fall of Victoria's Secret. So in 2018, the brand had to stop its fashion show after public backlash. They were well known for glamorizing a certain body type, and in 2018, their show's organizer made some controversial and pretty horrible topics about why he didn't feature plus-sized or transgender models, suggesting they didn't align with the fantasy image of the brand. So in 2023, they tried to make a comeback and talk about how they're much more inclusive now. But this was also met with a lot of controversy, and people really didn't like what they did. They released a film and they had a press event, and the general kind of consensus was that instead of keeping the brand image and, format that everyone previously loved, like I love the Victoria's Secret catwalks, I watch them religiously. Instead of keeping that format and making space for inclusivity and diversity and different model types, they chose to rebrand instead into basically a knockoff of Fenty Savage, and it just felt really off. Before we move on, there's another issue in fashion casting that I really want to talk about quickly. There were a couple of news stories last season talking about the fact that model agencies had gone directly to immigration camps and recruited young POC girls from there. And I was appalled with the news, but actually this goes back a lot longer than I thought, or I think most people realise. We all know that models are not paid well, they're not treated well, and it's just disgusting. And I think it just kind of encapsulates the idea that these young POC women are just being capitalised on and nobody actually cares about them. Next, let's talk about corporate fashion, because I think obviously as this isn't quite as public facing, it goes under the radar, but it's also a massive problem. Recent headlines that at Lululemon, being black is off-brand. There was a lot of backlash. I'm gonna come back to them in a minute when we discuss recent laws, but first I want to talk about the exit of Sarah Burton from Kering. So when Sarah exited Alexander McQueen, which she had been the creative director of in October 2023, and was replaced by a white man, that meant that all creative directors at Kering were white men. There was no diversity there. And the internet had a field day with this one, but it's pretty representative of the fashion industry as a whole. Let's talk about why this is. Fashion doesn't take diversity serious enough. So in 2020, new DEI laws were introduced, but many companies just viewed it as a tick box exercise and less of a way to actually reform their companies. Lululemon was one of the brands that tried to comply, but many employees said that it actually got worse after they put these guidelines into place. I was reading a report recently from Business of Fashion that suggests this is because of conservative backlash. Basically, it's become riskier for brands to publicly talk about the diversity and inclusivity work they're doing for fear that they'll get bashed by trolls online, or they might face similar backlash to what Budweiser did. Some companies are even renaming their departments for diversity and inclusion just to try to keep them under the radar and hope that they don't get called out for them. But other people think the problem's getting worse because public scrutiny has dropped off after the tragedy of George Floyd. So in 2020, we were all really concerned about diversity in every major industry in the world. And whilst we still feel that way, we're no longer calling out brands and asking them to tell us about how they're being diverse. And now brands think they can quietly drop the subject and no one will really notice. I'm sure I've missed some stuff out, so if you guys think I have, then please comment below. We can start discussion there. Obviously, this is all coming from the viewpoint of me. I am a certain gender, a certain age, a certain size in clothing. So obviously I'm not going to get everything, but I do want to start a discussion in the comments below. Let's quickly talk about what the industry is doing before the end of the video. So Aurora James set up what she calls the 15% pledge, based on the fact that Black people represent 15% of the population, at least in the US. So brands should be stocking at least 15% Black-owned businesses. She founded this in 2020 and it has had major success. It's followed by brands like Target, Walmart in the US, Sephora, I think. So yeah, it's doing really well and it's making a lot of progress in fashion and beauty, which is also a non-inclusive industry. So those DEI laws that I mentioned that came into effect in 2020 are constantly being developed. But like I said, they need to be pushed by brands, seeing them as more than just a tick box exercise. The sad truth is that there's not as much profit in it for them as there was in 2020 when they could gain social capital by talking about their diversity. So as consumers, there's a few things we can do to help encourage brands. You can, one, pay attention to which brands that are actually still talking about their diversity and actually making progress, you know, publishing reports, highlighting where they're doing right, talking about where they're doing wrong. And you can also call out the brands that aren't doing this. This goes for size inclusivity on the runway too, to be honest. We should be calling out the major fashion houses that seem to have decided diversity is no longer a priority for them. It's the same old story of we need to vote with our wallets, and brands will only pay attention when their money is at risk. Yeah, I hope you guys liked this video. I really enjoyed researching into it. I want to do a little bit more research, so if you have resources for that, please drop them below. I'd be very, very grateful. But I hope you have a lovely week and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.